Hello, students. Let's go to the second unit of the subject Business Economics. And in this unit, we'll be studying on demand analysis. We know that the knowledge of demand plays an important role in decision making. Demand analysis provides the basic information needed to guide some of the firm's most important activities: the production planning, sales management, advertisement, etc., requires the information of demand for the product. Demand analysis aims at finding out the factors affecting the demand or sales. The traditional theory of demand starts with an examination of the behavior of the consumer. Before we look into the law of diminishing marginal utility, let's understand the concepts of consumption and utility. Consumption refers to the satisfaction of human wants by using goods and services. The power of goods and services to satisfy the human wants is called utility. The relationship between consumption and utility can be shown as C is equal to F of U. That is, we say consumption has a functional relationship with utility. Here C refers to consumption, F to functional relationship, and U to utility. Dr. Alfred Marshall used money as the measuring rod of utility. Consumption takes place by comparing the utility of the product and its price. Hence, we also say C is equal to F of P. That is, consumption has a functional relationship with price as well. That is why here we use money as the measuring rod of utility. Now let's look into the distinction between cardinal utility and ordinal utility. In economics, quite often the use of two terms, namely cardinal utility and ordinal utility, is made to explain the behavior of consumers through different approaches. The terms cardinal and ordinal are actually borrowed from mathematics. The numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. are all cardinal numbers. The number 2, for example, is twice the size of 1, and 3 is thrice the size of 1. 4 is twice the size of 2. Here, what we mean to say is that cardinal numbers are quantifiable. Whereas, if you look into the ordinal numbers, in contrast, the numbers are like this, namely first, second, third, fourth, so on. We call these as ordinal numbers. The ordinal numbers are not quantifiable. Ordinal numbers are ranked or ordered. Just from ranking, there is no way of knowing the size of the number. The ordinal numbers, namely first, second, third, fourth, it could be 25, 50, 60, and 75, or they could be 100, 500, 1000, 1500, etc. Here, what we mean to say that ordinal numbers do not reveal the actual size of the numbers. They can only be ranked. The concept of ordinal utility is used on the assumption that the quantities of utility are meaningful. Cardinal utility allows us to compare the quantities of utility or satisfaction. So, Professor Marshall used the cardinal approach to analyze the behavior of the consumer. And here, Alfred Marshall used money as the measuring rod of utility. Next, we'll try to understand the difference between the two concepts, namely total utility and marginal utility. Now, what is total utility? The amount of utility derived from the consumption of all the units which is at the disposal of the consumer is known as total utility. Whereas marginal utility is the utility of an extra or an additional unit. Now let us suppose that the consumer consumes 6 units of commodity X. The amount of utility he derives from all units of X is total utility. Total utility is a direct function of quantity of the commodity in consideration. Symbolically, we can write total utility of commodity X as TUX is equal to F of QX. That is, total utility of X is a function of the total quantity of X consumed, where delta TUX divided by delta QX is greater than 0. So remember, total utility can never be negative or less than 0. With a larger stock, total utility tends to be more, and with the smaller stock, total utility tends to be less. Total utility cannot be negative or less than 0. The utility derived from an additional unit is called marginal utility. Marginal utility is that utility which is got from the consumption of an additional unit of the same commodity. Marginal unit is that unit which yields the least utility in the various consumption of the commodities. Symbolically, marginal utility of commodity X can be written as MUX is equal to TUX minus TUX minus 1. MUX represents marginal utility of X. TUX refers to total utility from commodity X minus TUX minus 1. TUX minus 1 refers to the total utility of the previous unit, that is X minus 1 units. We can understand this better with the computation of a table, namely the computation of marginal utility. Just look at the table. Here we see that the first column shows the units of commodity X consumed, and the second total utility, and the third column shows the marginal utility. Here we see that the total utility goes on increasing with increased consumption, while the marginal utility goes on decreasing. To find out marginal utility, we can also use the formula, namely MUX is equal to T delta TUX, that is change in the total utility of commodity X divided by delta QX, that is change in the quantity of X consumed, where So here you see that total utility from the first unit of x is 20, and the total utility with the 2 units second unit, so it becomes the total is 35. So how do we calculate the marginal utility? Delta TUX divided by delta QX. That is, what is the change in total utility? That is 35 minus 20. So that will be 15. What is the change in the units of consumption? 2 minus 1, that is 1. So 15 divided by 1. Delta TUX is 15. Delta QX is 1. So 15 divided by 1 is equal to 15. So the marginal utility of the second unit becomes 15. Similarly, you'll have to calculate for the third unit. Take the difference of 45 minus 35. That is 10. 10 divided by difference between 3 minus 2. Again 1. So 10 divided by 1 becomes 10. So this is the difference between total utility and marginal utility. Utility maximization is the aim of every consumer. When total utility is maximum, marginal utility is zero. This is where the consumer achieves the maximum utility. So next we'll look into the law of diminishing marginal utility. So what is this law of diminishing marginal utility? The law states that the more we have a thing, the less is the utility that we get from every additional unit. According to this law, when a person consumes the same commodity continuously, the marginal utility from the additional unit decreases. So here, the law states that the marginal utility of a commodity goes on diminishing when consumed continuously and when other things remain constant. So there is an inverse relationship between units of consumption and marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility shows an inverse relationship between the units of consumption and marginal utility of a commodity. Now let's look into the various assumptions before going into the illustration of the law. In economics, remember, we explain all the laws based on assumptions. The laws in economics are purely conditional. So what are the assumptions under the law of diminishing marginal utility? The first one is that the measurement of utility is cardinal. This is the basic assumption of Marshall's theory of consumer behavior. The law of diminishing marginal utility assumes that the consumer is capable of expressing the utility numerically. And the second assumption is that the factors influencing the consumption remain constant. We call it as ceteris paribus, which means other factors remaining constant. Now, which are the other factors influencing consumption? It assumes income, price of related goods, taste, fashion, preferences, and various other determinants of consumption to remain as they are, to remain constant. That's what we mean by the concept ceteris paribus. And the next assumption is rationality. Rationality is a basic assumption of the theory of demand. Rationality implies normal behavior and attempt to maximize satisfaction. The law of diminishing marginal utility always assumes rationality on the part of the consumer. And the next assumption is the constant marginal utility of money. The law of diminishing marginal utility assumes that the marginal utilities of everything decrease, but when it comes to money, it is assumed that it remains constant. And the next assumption is continuity. The law assumes continuity in consumption. Continuity implies consumption of the units of a same good one after the other successively without any time interval. For example, the consumption of one banana in the morning and another one in the evening will not diminish the marginal utility. If we have to measure the marginal utility, it has to be consumed one after the other without any time interval. And the next assumption is that the law operates only when the units of consumption are homogeneous or identical. Homogeneity implies similarities in quality, size, color, flavor, taste, etc. If the units are not homogeneous, the law will not hold good. For example, if we are consuming orange, and if the first orange consumed is sour and the second one is sweet, the law will not operate here. Definitely, you like the second one better than the first one because of a change in taste. That is why we always assume that the units of consumption are homogeneous. And the next assumption is the law assumes the units of consumption to be a standard one. The law operates only when the units of consumption are of reasonable size. They should neither be too big nor too small. If we consume coffee, we should always take it as a cup of coffee and not a spoon of coffee. So that is what we mean by standard units. And now let's go into the illustration of the law. According to the law of diminishing marginal utility, continuous consumption of the same commodity decreases the marginal utility. The total utility increases at a diminishing rate. Now, the question is, why does the consumer consume the same commodity continuously? Two reasons can be given here. One, satiability of particular wants. We know human wants are unlimited and the means to satisfy these wants are always scarce. Multiplicity of wants makes satisfaction of all wants impossible. We cannot satisfy all our wants, but some wants can be completely satisfied. To satisfy some wants, it is necessary to consume the same commodity continuously. When the desire for every successive unit become less intense, the utility from successive unit diminishes. Another reason is imperfect substitution of commodities. Since commodities are not perfect substitutes to each other, consumers have to consume the same commodity continuously. Only then the marginal utility is bound to decrease. Now, this law of diminishing marginal utility can be better explained with the help of a utility schedule. Now, just look into this table. Same way, the first column shows the units of consumption. Here we have taken idli as the commodity, and the second column shows the total utility, and the third column shows the marginal utility. So here, if you just see, this is an hypothetical consumer. When the consumer consumes the sixth idli, the marginal utility is zero. Zero marginal utility is always the indication of full satisfaction arising out of excess consumption. Thus, according to this law, marginal utility of a commodity varies inversely with its number, but the variation is not uniform or proportionate. It can be proportionate. Even if it is proportionate, it is incidental. To get the marginal utility curve, we have to represent these numbers on a graph. So we get what is called as the marginal utility curve. Now just look at the graph. OX axis represents the units of consumption and the Y axis shows the marginal utility. So we have the MU curve, that is the marginal utility curve. It slopes downwards to right, indicating an inverse relationship between marginal utility and units of consumption. When the stock of commodity increases, what happens to marginal utility? The marginal utility goes on decreasing. So here you see the point at which MU, the downward sloping curve, is the MU curve. The point at which MU curve intersects the x-axis, that is at 0, it is the point of full satisfaction. The downward slope of this marginal utility curve indicates negative values. The entire area is covered by the marginal utility curve, that is the MU curve, which represents the total utility of the commodity. In the next class, we will study the consumer's equilibrium, how full satisfaction is achieved, at what point the full satisfaction is achieved. So in the next class, we will show both the curves, namely the marginal utility curve and the total utility curve, and the relationship between marginal utility curve and the total utility curve, and the determination of consumers' equilibrium. That's all for now. Thank you.